They took my dead wife's diary out of a moving box. They read her private words at my own birthday table. They laughed at the part that hurt. Everyone should know the real Francis, she said, not just the saint we pretend he was. I did not raise my voice. I set my fork down. I finished my coffee. Then I drove home. I found the one page she never got to. 3 weeks later at my own shop, in front of the banker she'd invited to celebrate, that page came back around, and it closed the door on all of it. But before the open house, there was the birthday dinner. I was still holding my fork when my daughter-in-law stood up. She opened my dead wife's diary. She started reading my private grief out loud, to 22 relatives, like it was the evening's entertainment. My name is Francis Corrigan. I am 72 years old. I did not raise my voice. I never have. That was never how I did business. It was never how I ran a family either. For 47 years I cut glass for a living. Storefronts, church windows, mirrors for every bathroom in 3 zip codes. My hands know a crack before my eyes do. You run your thumb along a pane. You feel where the stress sits, long before it ever spreads. People think glass breaks all at once. It doesn't. It fails exactly where somebody already weakened it. Months before. Nobody tells you when. That's the whole story, really. I just didn't know yet where the crack was. The dinner was at Todd's house, Larchmont Drive, the newer end of Millbrook Falls, the kind of street where the driveways are wider than they need to be. 22 of us around 3 folding tables pushed together. My grandkids at the far end. A sheet cake with my name misspelled by the bakery. Francis with 2 S's. Like nobody could be bothered to check. Dorothy would have called that bakery herself. I just ate the cake. I'd turned 72 4 days earlier. Todd said work got in the way, so we celebrated on a Saturday instead. Fine by me. I don't need the exact day. I need my family in one room. That's getting harder every year to arrange. Brianne stood up somewhere around the second slice. My daughter-in-law, 36 years old. Sharp in the way that looks good on a resume. Feels different across a dinner table. She had a book in her hands. Brown leather, corners gone soft. The way leather goes soft after 40 years of being touched by the same person. Every night. I knew that book on sight. My stomach knew it before my head caught up. I found the sweetest thing, Brianne said, tapping the cover. Going through some of Dorothy's old boxes in the sewing room. Everyone should hear this. Dorothy kept a diary every night of her life. Not for anyone. For herself. She wrote in it after the piano students left. After the dishes were done, sitting in the chair by the sunroom window. The one I built her, pain by pain, back when the boys were young and money was thin. I never read a word of it while she was alive. That was our agreement. Unspoken. Solid as a foundation. Her private thoughts stayed private. Mine did too. Brianne opened it to a page she'd dog-eared. She started reading. Dorothy's handwriting. Out loud, in a voice that wasn't Dorothy's. Telling the whole table about a fight Dorothy and I had. 31 years back. Over money. A bad month. A shop payment I couldn't cover. Words I said that I was not proud of. Words Dorothy forgave me for the next morning. Over eggs. Words that were never meant to travel further than that kitchen. I just think it's sweet, Brianne said again when she finished, looking around the table for the laugh she wanted. Everyone should know the real Francis. Not just the saint we pretend he was. Nobody laughed. A few people looked at their plates. My granddaughter, 12 years old, looked at me like she was waiting for me to do something. I looked at my son. Todd sat 2 seats down, staring at the tablecloth, saying nothing at all. That was the part that actually cost me something. Not the diary. Not Brianne's voice, reading words that weren't hers to read. My own son, 39 years old, looking at a tablecloth instead of at his father. I set my fork down. I finished my coffee. Slow the way I always drink it. A man in a hurry tips his cup, burns his lip. I have never been in that kind of hurry. Then I stood up, thanked Todd for the dinner, told my granddaughter happy almost birthday to me, and drove home. Home is Spruce Hollow Road. 44 years now. I sat in Dorothy's chair that night. The one by the sunroom window, the one she wrote in every evening. I thought about the box in the sewing room, about what else might be sitting in it, about what Brianne hadn't found yet, because there was a page she skipped. She read the fight. She never found the page after it. I knew that page. I'd read it myself 3 weeks before Dorothy died. She'd called me into that same chair, read it to me in her own voice, the only voice it was ever meant to be read in. She was talking about the building, the one Todd's shop sits inside, the one on Furnace Street, the one I built this whole business around. She was talking about a decision, 2 years before she passed. A decision I'd already made. I never told our son about it. Some things you protect quietly. You only explain them when someone tries to take what was never theirs. I didn't say any of that at the birthday table. I have never once explained myself to a room that wasn't ready to hear it. I just drove home, sat in her chair. Let the house go quiet around me. It's been quiet 2 years now. Since the cancer took her. 11 weeks flat. Fast enough we barely had time to say the things people say. Slow enough we said most of them anyway. 47 years I ran Corrigan glass and glazing. Started it with $60 of cutting tools. A storefront on Furnace Street, rented for $110 a month. Back when that number meant something different than it does now. Grew it into the shop every contractor in 3 counties called first. Storefront glass, church windows, custom mirror work. Your name is only as good as your last cut. I never once let a bad cut leave my shop with my name on the invoice. By the time I was 50, we had 6 men on the payroll, a waiting list for custom mirror work that ran 8 weeks long. By 60, the shop was worth more than the house, the truck, and the boat put together. Dorothy kept the books those first 15 years. At the kitchen table. After her last piano student went home, she could make $1 do work most men never asked $1 to do. 3 years ago, I handed the daily running of it to Todd, kept the building, kept the equipment, kept a seat on the little board, the 3 of us, from back when the shop got big enough to need one. I didn't hand him the keys and walk away blind. I've never done anything blind in my life. The next morning, the morning after that birthday dinner, I had Gary Oglethorpe drive me down to the diner on Furnace Street anyway. Gary's run my shop floor for 31 years. Opens the door every morning at 6. Drives me to every doctor's appointment since Dorothy passed, whether I ask him to or not. The diner had a cracked storefront pane. Corner crack, the bad kind, the kind that walks if you leave it. New owner, young fellow. Every glass outfit in the county had quoted him 3 days and $400 just to look at it. I told him give me 20 minutes. I scored that pane freehand. No straight edge. Never have needed one. You feel the glass under your thumb before you ever touch a cutter to it. You find where the stress already sits. You don't fight it. You follow it. Clean line. First pass. Snap true. The young man just stood there. 72 years old, Gary said to him, grinning. And he still does his own work. I don't raise my voice at a crack in the glass, I told him. I find where it started, and I stop it there. That's not just a line about glass. Dorothy used to tell me that was the truest thing I ever said about anything. She told me that once in her chair by the sunroom window, the year we were deciding whether to buy the old Hutchins lot next door. I wanted to say yes on the spot. That's what a younger man does with anything that looks like growth. Dorothy made me sit with it 3 full days first. You don't fix a crack by rushing at it, Francis, she told me that week, 30-some years back now. You said so yourself, the very first year we opened. You find where it started. You stop it there. A business decision's no different than a pane of glass. Rush it, and you just spread whatever's already under the surface. We bought the Hutchins lot on the 4th day. $12,000. Money we didn't fully have. Borrowed against the shop itself. Best $12,000 I ever spent. That lot became the loading dock. The loading dock is what let us take the medical building contracts that carry us to this day. Dorothy never once said I told you so. She just kept a small framed photograph of that empty lot on her sewing room shelf for the rest of her life, the way some women keep a wedding photograph. To her, that patch of gravel and weeds was its own kind of vow. I charged the young man $40 for the pain and the labour. He tried to give me more. I told him 40 was the job. A man who charges more than the job is worth has already started lying to himself. And lying to yourself is the first crack in anything that ever fails. Gary didn't ask about the dinner on the drive back. He didn't have to. Word moves fast in a town the size of Millbrook Falls, 20 minutes off Route 422. Close enough to Kittanning that everybody's cousin knows everybody's cousin. By the time we got back to the shop, 3 different men on the floor had already heard some version of what Brienne read out loud. She had no right, Gary said finally, once we were alone in the back office. Whatever else. She had no right to Dorothy's own words. No, I said. She didn't. Gary's known me 31 years. He walked in off the street at 22, asking for any work at all. I put him on sweeping floors. $4 an hour, that's all the shop could afford to pay a green kid back then. He worked his way up to foreman inside of 6 years. He stood up at Dorothy's funeral 2 years ago and read a passage she'd picked out herself, months before she passed. She trusted his voice with it more than she trusted her own son's. Grief does strange things to a family's voice. Dorothy used to say you were the son the shop gave you, Gary said, quiet, in that back office. Since you only ever got the one from your own house. I never forgot her saying that. I don't intend to forget it now either. I know you don't, I said. That's why I trust you with things I wouldn't hand another living soul. I didn't say anything else about it that day. I went through the week's invoices instead. A commercial glazing job for the new medical building, out past the highway. $11,200, half up front. A church window repair in Dunmore Junction, $600, cash. A job I still take personally. Dorothy's father helped raise the money for that sanctuary 60 years back. Todd came by the shop twice that week. Both times he found some reason to be in the back when I was up front. Up front when I was in the back, 39 years old, running a business with 41 employees. And he couldn't stand in the same room as his own father, not for longer than it took to grab a set of keys off the hook. That's the part I sat with, more than the diary. A son who won't meet your eyes already knows he's standing somewhere he shouldn't be. I didn't know yet exactly where that was. I had a fair idea. Here's the thing about running a shop for 47 years. You learn to read a balance sheet the way I read a pane of glass. You learn where the stress sits before anybody points it out to you. There'd been a look on Brianne's face, at that birthday table, right before she opened that diary. Not cruelty exactly. Something closer to a woman doing arithmetic in her head while she smiled at you. I'd seen that look before. On contractors about to ask for an extension on an invoice. On men who needed you to feel small enough that you wouldn't ask hard questions. I didn't know yet what the arithmetic added up to. I only knew there was arithmetic. 3 days after the dinner, I drove out to Oakmont Cemetery, the way I do most Sundays. Dorothy's stone sits under a maple that turns the whole plot gold every October. I sat on the little bench I'd set there myself, poured the concrete and all, and I told her about the dinner. I do that, talk to her out there. A man who spent 34 years married to a woman. That sharp doesn't stop needing her opinion just because she's not in the room to give it. You'd have known exactly what to say, I told her. You always did. The wind moved through that maple. I sat there another 20 minutes before I stood up, brushed off my knees, and drove home. I am not a man who believes a tree answers you. I am a man who believes sitting still long enough lets your own head answer for you. That Sunday mine did, because there was a locked-in box in my workshop desk. Had been there 2 years. I built that desk myself out of oak. The same year I built her the sunroom chair. There's a drawer in it. Nobody but Gary knows opens with a second key. One I keep on my own ring, not the shop ring. Recipe box, it looks like, if you ever saw it. Scuffed tin, faded roses painted on the lid. The kind you'd find in any grandmother's kitchen, in this county. It never held a single recipe. I hadn't opened it since the week I put it there. I didn't need to open it that Sunday either. I only needed to know it was still exactly where I'd left it. And it was. I'd checked twice already, without telling anyone. The way you check a load-bearing wall isn't just your imagination. Before you go telling the whole family the house is about to come down. Monday morning, I called Priscilla Wenrick's office. 15 years she's held our family's paperwork. Sharpest lawyer in 3 counties. Never once needed to raise her voice either. Some people just come built that way. Her secretary said she had an opening Thursday. Tell her it's about Dorothy's diary, I said. She'll move something. She moves something. Priscilla always does, for the things that actually matter. 15 years, and she's never once mistaken what actually matters for what only looks urgent. I hung up the phone. Sat a long minute in my own kitchen. The house quiet, the way it's been quiet 2 years now. I thought about that dog-eared page Brianne read out loud. About the page right after it that she never found. Some cracks you can see from across the room. Some you only find when you run your thumb along the whole pane. Slow, patient, feeling for exactly where it gives. I had a Thursday appointment. I had a locked-in box that had waited 2 years without complaint. And I had a granddaughter's face, 12 years old, looking at me across a birthday table like she was waiting for her grandfather to do something. I intended to. Thursday came slower than most Thursdays do. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday at the shop, same as always. Gary and I walked the floor together every morning at 6:30, checking the tempering unit, the cutting tables, the racks of storefront glass waiting on the medical building job. $11,200, half paid, half due on delivery. That job alone would carry payroll for 3 weeks if nothing else came in behind it. Nothing else came in behind it. Not that week. Todd ran the front office those 2 days like a man bailing a boat with a coffee cup. I watched him from the back more than once, on the phone, jaw tight, one hand pressed flat against his own desk, like he was trying to hold something down that kept wanting to come up. I didn't ask. A man doesn't ask his son a question he isn't ready to hear the answer to. Not until he's got the ground under him to stand on when the answer comes. I already had a fair idea what the answer was going to be. I'd run a shop long enough to recognise the sound of a business 4 months behind on something. Wednesday evening, Gary stayed late with me in the back office, the two of us going over the tempering unit's maintenance log. He mentioned, careful, the way a man mentions something he's been sitting on, that the second tempering unit still hadn't turned a real profit. The one Brienne pushed Todd to buy 18 months back. $98,000, Gary said. That machine, financed through the bank in Dunmore Junction. Todd told me himself it was Brienne's idea front to back. Said commercial contracts were coming that would pay it off in 2 years. Did they come? Gary shook his head. Not the way she figured. 2 jobs, maybe $11,000 total, against a note that runs better than $1,500 a month. I did that arithmetic in my head, slow and complete, before I said a word about it out loud. 98,000 borrowed, 1,500 a month due, 11,000 earned against it in a year and a half. That's not a business finding its footing. That's a hole a woman keeps digging because she's already too far down to climb out without somebody noticing. Does Todd know how bad it's gotten? I asked. I don't think Todd knows the whole shape of it, Gary said. Brienne's been handling the books close to her own chest since she took them over. I only know what I know, because the bank called the shop line by mistake last month, looking for a payment. I answered it before Brienne got to it first. I sat with that a long moment. $98,000. A woman standing up at my birthday table with a diary in her hands, looking for a laugh, while 4 months behind on a note that size. People do strange things when they're scared and won't say so out loud. Some men drink, some women shop. Some people reach for whoever's standing closest and make them small, so their own trouble feels less like the only thing in the room. I didn't say any of that to Gary. I said, thank you for telling me. I locked the office up myself that night, the way I always do, testing the back door twice, the way I've tested it every night for 30 years. A door you don't check is a door you're only guessing is locked. Thursday morning I put on the good jacket. Blue. The one Dorothy picked out for my 65th birthday. The only birthday jacket I've ever kept past its first year. Gary drove me into Dunmore Junction, the county seat, 11 miles east. Past the courthouse, the old feed store, the diner where Priscilla Wenrick's father used to hold court over eggs every morning before he handed the practice to her. Priscilla's office sits over the hardware store on Main Street. Same building 15 years running. She still uses her father's desk, dark walnut, scarred along one edge, where somebody, decades back, set a hot coffee pot down without thinking. Francis, she said, standing to shake my hand. Priscilla shakes her hand like she means the whole transaction of it. Firm, brief, done. I heard a version of Saturday night already. Millbrook Falls doesn't keep secrets well. No, I said. It doesn't. Sit down. Tell me the part the town got wrong. I told her the whole thing, start to finish. The diary, the page Brienne read, the page she skipped. Todd's silence. The tin box sitting in my workshop desk, still exactly where I'd left it. Priscilla listened the way she's always listened. Pen down, eyes on me, not writing a single word until I'd finished. You want to know if the trust holds? She said. When I was done. It wasn't a question. 15 years she doesn't ask me questions she already knows the shape of. I want to know if it holds against somebody who doesn't know it exists yet. Priscilla pulled a folder from the cabinet behind her desk, one she's kept locked since the day we signed it. 2 years back, 3 weeks after Dorothy's diagnosis. I remembered every detail of that afternoon, like it happened that morning. Dorothy in the chair, across from this same desk, thinner than she'd ever been, steady as a foundation anyway, telling Priscilla exactly what she wanted done with the building on Furnace Street, before the disease took the choice away from either of us. The Furnace Street building, the equipment inside it, and 40 acres of timberland out past the old quarry road are all held in the Dorothy Corrigan Family Trust, Priscilla said, reading off her own file like she was reminding herself, not me. Your sole trustee, Gary Oglethorpe, is named successor trustee should anything happen to you. The trust owns the real property outright. The operating company leases the building from the trust on a month-to-month basis, $4,100 a month. Adjustable, cancelable by either party with 60 days' notice. And the loan Brianne took out on the tempering unit. What loan? Priscilla asked. I watched her face do the thing lawyers' faces do when a fact lands somewhere they didn't expect it. Nobody's filed anything against the building. If they tried to use the building as collateral for an equipment loan, the bank's attorney would have hit the trust's recorded deed inside of a single title search. The whole application would have died on the desk before it ever reached a loan committee. They financed the machine itself, I said. $98,000. Gary tells me it's 4 months behind. Priscilla sat back slow in her chair. The kind of slow that means a mind working through several branches of a problem at once. Then whatever collateral they pledged, it wasn't the real estate. The trust owns that free and clear. No liens. Nothing recorded against it since the day we filed it. If Brianne believes the building sits inside her reach, she's operating on information that was never true. I thought about Dorothy's diary, sitting in that dog-eared box, about the page Brianne read, and the page after it she never found, about a woman who totals up a room the second she walks into it. Dorothy's own words. The week before she died, sitting in that same sunroom chair, holding my hand harder than her strength should have allowed by then. There's more, Priscilla said, and pulled a second sheet from the file. Dorothy left a supplemental letter with the trust documents, sealed, dated the same week we signed everything. She asked me to hold it until you asked for it, or until circumstances made it necessary. I'd say from what you've just told me, circumstances have made themselves plain. She slid the envelope across the desk. Cream paper. Dorothy's handwriting on the front. My name. Nothing else. I didn't open it there, some things you don't open in front of even the people you trust most. I put it in my jacket pocket, the good blue jacket, and I told Priscilla I'd read it at home, in her chair, the way Dorothy would have wanted it read. There's something else you should know before you go, Priscilla said. I had a call 2 weeks ago. Brianne asking general questions about how a family trust interacts with a business loan. She didn't give me details. Didn't say whose trust. At the time, I assumed she meant something academic. A client education question, the kind people ask when they're circling a topic without admitting why. She was asking about mine, I said. She just didn't know it was mine. That would be my read now. Yes. I sat there another minute, turning that over. Brianne had been circling this building for weeks, maybe longer, never knowing the ground under it had already been moved somewhere she couldn't reach, 2 years before she ever started circling. She'd read Dorothy's private grief out loud at my birthday table, looking for a laugh, or never knowing the very next page in that diary named the one thing that would end her plan. Cold. I want you to do something for me, I told Priscilla. Not yet. Not today. But when the time comes, I want you holding both things in your hands. The trust and the diary. The diary isn't in my possession, Priscilla said. It will be, I said, before I'm done with this. I drove home with Gary that afternoon, the envelope against my chest the whole ride. I did not say much. Gary's the kind of man who lets a silence sit exactly as long as it needs to. 31 years working for me, and he's never once filled a quiet I wasn't ready to have filled. That evening, I sat in Dorothy's chair by the sunroom window. The light going long and gold, the way it does in early October. I opened the envelope with the same care I'd use opening a pane of glass I couldn't afford to crack. Her handwriting hadn't changed in 40 years. Steady, small, leaning a little right. The same hand that used to write out sheet music corrections for her piano students in the margins of their workbooks. Francis, it began. If you're reading this, then something has happened that made Priscilla decide the time was right, and I trust her judgment the same as I trust yours. I want you to know I thought about this longer than you probably imagine, sitting right here in this chair after you'd gone to bed, working out exactly how to protect what we built, without ever having to explain myself to anyone who wasn't ready to understand it. I love our son. I have loved Todd since before he could hold his own head up. I will love him past the day I stop being able to tell you so myself. But I have watched the woman he married total. Up a room the second she walks into it. The way some people can't help but do. I have never once believed love was going to be enough, on its own, to keep what we built safe from that kind of arithmetic. So I asked you to do the quiet thing, the unglamorous thing. Move the building and the equipment into a trust neither of them could touch. Keep a lease between the company and the land so the business stays healthy but the ground under it stays ours. Never explain a word of it to anyone until the day somebody tried to take what was never theirs to take. If that day has come, Francis, I want you to do exactly what you've always done with a crack in a pane of glass. Find where it started. Stop it there. Don't shout. You never have. Not once in 34 years. And I loved you for that more than almost anything else about you. And when this is over, however it ends, make sure Todd understands it was never about punishing him. It was about protecting the one thing his father and I ever built that was worth protecting past our own lifetimes. Tell him his mother loved him enough to plan for a day she hoped would never come. I kept a diary every night of my life, Francis, and most of it was nothing anybody but me would ever want to read. But if someone ever goes looking through those pages hoping to find something to shame you with, hand them the whole book. Let them keep reading. A few pages past whatever they find first, they'll find the page where I wrote down exactly what I gave this family, and exactly what this family still owes in return. I love you. I always did, even the nights I didn't say so. Dorothy. I sat in that chair a long while after I finished reading. The light gone from gold to grey outside the sunroom glass. I did not cry, though I came closer to it than I had in the 2 years since we buried her. Because she'd known. 2 years before that birthday dinner, sitting in this same chair, already sick, already tired in a way she never once let show at the dinner table. She'd known exactly what kind of arithmetic Brianne carried around. She'd built the wall before the storm ever showed up on the horizon. I folded the letter back into its envelope, set it in the tin box, in my workshop desk, next to the trust documents that had been waiting there 2 years for a reason to matter. Locked the drawer with the second key, the one that isn't on the shop ring. Then I went to bed, in the house that's been quiet 2 years now. For the first time since that birthday table, I slept the whole night through. 2 weeks past quiet. I went to the shop most mornings, walked the floor with Gary, signed off on invoices, drove out to Oakmont on Sundays and sat on my concrete bench under Dorothy's maple. I did not mention the letter to anyone. I did not mention Priscilla's visit. A man doesn't hand out his cards before he's ready to play the hand. The shop's own numbers kept moving the whole time. A business keeps moving whether or not the family running it is at peace. The medical building job closed out at $11,200 total, half already collected. The remaining $5,600 due on final delivery, which Gary scheduled for the second week of that quiet stretch. The church window repair in Dunmore Junction came in at $600 even, cash, same as always. I donated 100 of it back to the building fund, the way I have every year since Dorothy's father helped raise the money for that sanctuary 60 years back. Payroll for the shop's 9 employees ran just under $14,000 every 2 weeks, a number I still checked personally against the time cards each cycle, the same way I'd checked it for 47 years. Trust or no trust, son running the daily books or not. I found, going through that fortnight's figures, a small discrepancy in the shop's petty cash log, $85 unaccounted for. I mentioned it to Gary. Not with any accusation in it, simply the kind of thing a careful man notices. Brianne's been handling petty cash reconciliation since she took over the books, Gary said, careful himself. I'll ask her about it if you want. Not yet, I said. $85 isn't the crack I'm watching right now. It might be nothing. It might be carelessness born of a woman juggling a debt she's hiding from her own husband. Either way, it's not worth tipping our hand over yet. Let it sit in the ledger. We'll account for it properly once the larger matter's settled. That was a hard discipline to hold, I'll admit plainly. A man who's spent 47 years balancing books to the penny does not enjoy watching an unexplained $85 sit unresolved. But patience has always been the only tool I've ever trusted more than urgency. I trusted it here too. Todd started meeting my eyes again, a little by the second week. Not all the way. Enough that I could see the strain sitting behind them, the look of a man doing arithmetic. He doesn't want to finish. It was Brienne who moved first. She called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice bright, in the particular way people get bright right before they ask you for something. "Francis, I wanted to talk to you about the shop's insurance situation," she said. "Todd and I think it might be time to look at some, well, protections. For everyone." "What kind of protections?" I said. Flat. I don't ask a question I don't want the whole truthful answer to. There's a program, through the bank actually, where a family can set up what's called a durable power of attorney. Just so things run smoothly if anything were ever to happen. Given your age, it's very standard, Francis. Lots of families do it. I let a silence sit there, long enough that she filled it herself. "It's not about capacity or anything like that," she said. "Too quick. It's just practical. You're 72. Things happen. We just want to make sure the business is protected." "The business is protected," I said. "Has been for a long while. I just think, and Todd agrees, that it would give everyone peace of mind if some of the paperwork reflected current reality. The trust arrangement, for instance. I understand there's some kind of trust holding the building. It might make more sense going forward for that to sit inside the operating company directly. Cleaner, easier for the bank to work with, if we ever need to refinance anything." There it was. Not loud, not a demand. Not a suggestion dressed up soft. The exact shape a woman uses when she's testing whether the door's locked before she tries the handle. "I'll think about it," I told her. I ended the call the way I end every call. I don't intend to act on the way the other party hopes. Polite, final. No door left open for a second try that evening. I sat in my kitchen a long minute after I hung up. $98,000, 4 months behind, and now Brienne wanted the trust folded into the operating company where a bank could reach it. She wasn't asking to protect me. She was asking to move the one piece of ground she needed, out of a trust she didn't understand, into a company she already controlled the books of, so she could pledge it against a note that was already drowning her. I called Priscilla the next morning. "She's circling closer," I told her. Durable power of attorney, folding the trust into the company, dressed up as peace of mind. "That confirms what the loan call 2 weeks back suggested," Priscilla said. "She's aware there's a trust. She doesn't fully understand its structure. Otherwise she'd be asking how to break it directly, not fold it into something she already controls. She thinks this is still fixable through paperwork you'll sign willingly." "I won't sign anything," I said. "I know you won't, but you should expect this to escalate, Francis. A person cornered by $98,000 of debt and 4 months of missed payments doesn't stop asking after one no." She adjusts the ask. Priscilla was right, the way she's been right about most things in 15 years. 2 days later, my daughter Karen called me from Ohio, worried, the way a daughter 3 states away gets worried when she hears half a story. Second-hand. "Dad, Brienne called me," Karen said. She's saying things, that you've seemed forgetful lately, that you got confused about a payment schedule at the shop last month." "Dad, is everything okay?" I have never once, in 72 years, missed a payment schedule, never forgotten an invoice, never lost a thread of arithmetic in front of anyone at that shop. I run a tighter set of books in my head than most accountants keep on paper. But I understood, hearing my own daughter's worried voice, exactly what Brienne was building, one phone call at a time, to people who weren't in the room to see the truth of it for themselves. "I'm fine, Karen," I said, and I meant it. Calm, the way I mean everything I say. I haven't forgotten a single thing. I think Brienne's under some pressure of her own right now. She's looking for a story that makes it somebody else's problem instead of hers. "She sounded really concerned, Dad." "I know she did," I said. "That's usually how it sounds, right before somebody asks you to sign something." Karen went quiet a moment. "She's sharp, my daughter. Sharper than she gives herself credit for. You think she's after something specific?" "I think a lot of things, Karen. I don't have all the pieces yet. When I do, you'll be the first person I call after Priscilla." That seemed to settle her enough for the moment, though I could hear, underneath it, the same worry Todd's silence carried at that birthday table. Nobody in my family wanted to believe Brienne was capable of what I already suspected. Families rarely do, until the proof is sitting right in front of them. 3 more calls came that week. My sister-in-law in Erie, an old church friend of Dorothy's, even Gary's own wife at the grocery store stopped by somebody who'd heard, through however many hands a rumour travels through in a town this size, that Francis Corrigan had started slipping. I hadn't slipped a single day in my life. I cut a perfect freehand line on tempered glass 3 weeks earlier, in front of a witness half my age who still talks about it. But a rumour doesn't need truth to travel. It only needs somebody willing to plant it, and enough worried people willing to pass it along out of love rather than malice. That's the elder dignity trick, if you want to call it a trick. Once somebody plants the idea that you're slipping, every normal thing you do gets read through that lens. Forget where you put your keys once, at any age, and it's just a Tuesday. Forget them at 72, after somebody's already whispered confused into 3 or 4 ears, and suddenly it's evidence. I did not forget my keys, I did not miss a payment, I did not confuse a payment schedule. I ran my shop the same precise way I'd run it for 47 years. I made certain that week to be seen doing it. I signed every invoice myself, in front of Gary, in front of the office staff, in clear block letters, dated, initialed. I walked the floor every morning at 6:30, same as always. I answered every phone call that came into that shop personally for 2 full weeks, so that anyone circling for a story about a confused old man would find nothing but a man running his business exactly the way he always had. The rumour caught up to me directly on a Sunday, at church, of all places. The one Dorothy and I had attended together for over 40 years. The same sanctuary, whose stained glass I'd repaired more times than I could count. Reverend Aldous caught me in the parking lot after the service. Careful the way a man of the cloth gets careful when he's about to repeat something he'd rather not have heard at all. "Francis, I don't mean to pry, but Ethel Marchbanks mentioned to me you've been having some trouble lately." "Memory trouble. I wanted to check on you myself, man to man, rather than let it just sit as gossip." "I appreciate you asking me directly instead of letting it sit," I told him. "I haven't had a single day of memory trouble in my life, Reverend." I ran a full physical and mental evaluation with Dr. Mercer 2 weeks back, unprompted, because I suspected exactly this kind of talk was already moving through town. I've got the notarized results if you'd ever like to see them. "That won't be necessary, Francis. I trust you. I always have. I just wanted to hear it from you plain, rather than let a rumour answer for you." "I'd rather answer for myself every time," I said. "That's the whole trouble with rumours. They answer for you whether you ask them to or not." Ethel Marchbanks herself was standing not 30 feet away, pretending to admire the church's hydrangeas. I walked over to her directly, the way I've walked toward every hard conversation in my life, instead of around it. "Ethel," I said, "I hear my memory's been a topic of conversation lately." She went the particular shade of red a person goes when they're caught having repeated something they shouldn't have. "Oh, Francis, I only heard it from Brienne at the beauty parlour. I didn't mean anything unkind by passing it along. I only worried is all." "I know you didn't mean unkindness, Ethel. I'd ask you one favour, though. Next time somebody hands you a story about an old man losing his grip, ask them how they know it, before you carry it any further. Most rumours die of embarrassment the second somebody asks where they actually came from." Ethel apologised, sincere. I believed her sincerity, the same as I believed Karen's worry, and Reverend Aldous' careful question. None of these people meant me harm. They were simply standing in the path of a story somebody else had built on purpose, passing it along out of the same love and worry that makes a small town what it is. That's the particular cruelty of the elder dignity trick. It doesn't need cruel people to spread. It only needs one person willing to plant it, and a town full of decent people willing to worry out loud. Priscilla, meanwhile, was building something of her own. She pulled the full loan documentation on the tempering unit, called in a favour with a contact at the bank, confirmed, in writing, that the collateral pledged against the $98,000 note was the equipment itself and the operating company's accounts receivable. Nothing tied to the Furnace Street real estate at all. She overpromised somewhere, Priscilla told me, the following Thursday, back in her office over the hardware store. I don't know yet who she overpromised to, or what exactly she's told them, but a woman circling this hard, this specifically, around a piece of real estate she doesn't actually control, is a woman who's already made a representation somewhere that she can't back up. "Find out where," I said. It took her 4 more days, a phone call to a contact who handled small business refinancing at the Dunmore Junction Bank. Careful and roundabout, the kind of question a lawyer knows how to ask without tipping her hand. What came back confirmed the shape of it entirely. Brianne had scheduled a meeting 3 weeks out with the bank's senior loan officer, a man named Walton Priddy, to discuss refinancing the equipment note against, in her own words on the meeting request, the real property the business operates from, property she did not own, property she did not control, property that had sat quiet and untouched inside a trust for 2 years. My name as sole trustee, Gary's as successor. Exactly the way Dorothy asked me to build it, before the disease ever gave either of us a reason to rush. She's about to promise a bank collateral she doesn't have, Priscilla said. If that meeting happens the way the request reads, and the bank later discovers the property was never hers to pledge, that's not just an embarrassing conversation, Francis. Depending on what she's put in writing already, that could expose her, and possibly Todd by extension, to a fraud claim from the lender. I sat with that a long moment. My own daughter-in-law, 4 months behind on a note she took out without fully telling my son how bad it had gotten, was 3 weeks away from standing in front of a bank officer, pledging land that had never been hers to offer. When's the meeting? I asked. 3 weeks from this coming Monday. I did the arithmetic on the calendar, slow, complete, before I said another word. 3 weeks from that Monday put us 4 days past the shop's 40th anniversary, open house. An event Todd had already scheduled 2 months back. Invitations printed. Half the county on the list, including, I now understood, Walton Priddy himself, invited as a courtesy because the bank had financed 2 smaller equipment purchases for us over the years. Brianne had built her own trap and invited the man who'd spring it to the exact event where I'd already decided, the moment I read Dorothy's letter, that the whole matter would need to be settled. The open house, I said. That's where this ends. You want to do this in front of 40 people. Dorothy wanted her own words to answer for her. If it ever came to this, I said, she wanted it done where the truth could stand up in a room, not whispered in an office where nobody but lawyers ever hear it. I intend to give her exactly that. Priscilla studied me a moment, the way she does when she's deciding whether a plan is sound or just satisfying. I'll need the diary, she said finally. The actual physical book, not a copy. I'll get it, I said. I did not yet know exactly how. Brianne still had the diary somewhere in that sewing room, or wherever she'd moved it since the dinner. I would need it in my own hands, and then in Priscilla's, before that open house arrived. That was a problem I intended to solve, the same way I solve every problem in my life, quietly, without asking anyone's permission to be patient about it. It turned out to be simpler than I expected, and it turned out to run straight through Gary. Gary mentioned it to me almost sideways, the way he mentions most things that matter. Over coffee in the back office, a week after Priscilla confirmed the bank meeting, Brianne asked me last month to haul a couple boxes to the donation centre, he said. Sewing room clean-out. I loaded up the truck same as she asked. Didn't get around to dropping them off before the birthday dinner happened. After that, I figured I'd hold on to them a while. Didn't feel right, giving away Dorothy's things on Brianne's say-so. What's in the boxes, Gary? Sewing patterns mostly. Some old photograph albums. And a second diary. Older one. Looks like it predates the one Brianne read from at the dinner. My chest did something it hadn't done in 2 years. There's 2 diaries. Looks that way. This one's got a different cover. Green, not brown. Water-stained on one corner. I asked Gary to bring both boxes to my house that evening. He did. Quiet. No questions. The way he's done nearly everything I've asked of him for 31 years. I sat at my kitchen table that night and went through them slow. Photograph albums of Todd as a boy, missing a front tooth, holding up a trout he'd caught off the dock at Corrigan Springs. Sewing patterns Dorothy never got around to using. At the bottom of the second box, wrapped in a dish towel like somebody meant to protect it, the green diary. It ran earlier than the brown one Brianne had read from. 19 years of entries. The last one dated 4 months before Dorothy's diagnosis. I read it slow, over 2 nights at the kitchen table, in her chair by the sunroom window, wherever felt right for whichever page I'd reached. Most of it was ordinary. Piano students, weather, a recipe she liked. A worry about Todd's grades one autumn in his teens. But near the back, dated the spring before her diagnosis, I found the page. Francis asked me today what I thought about Brianne. It read. I told him the truth, the way I always have. I think she's smart, and I think she's frightened of not having enough, in a way that makes her count things nobody else is counting. I watched her at Sunday dinner add up, with her eyes, everything on this table. The china, the silver, even the chair I'm sitting in. The way another woman might glance at a room and simply see a room. I don't think she's cruel. I think she's scared, and scared people reach for whatever's closest and try to make it smaller so their own fear feels more manageable. I told Francis we should be careful. Not cruel back, just careful. He agreed, the way he always agrees when I've already done the thinking and he trusts the conclusion. I don't know yet what careful looks like practically. But I intend to find out, and I intend to do it quietly, the way we do everything, so nobody ever has to feel accused of anything before the moment it actually matters. I sat with that entry a long while. Dorothy had seen this coming, not in specifics, but in shape, years before either of us had any proof at all. She'd trusted her own read of a person over any evidence. She'd asked me, gently, to build a wall before either of us knew exactly what storm it would need to hold back. I called Priscilla the next morning. There's a second diary, I told her. Older one. Dorothy wrote about Brienne directly, years before any of this. I think it matters. Bring both books in, Priscilla said. The one Brienne read from, and this new one. I want to see exactly what we're working with before that open house. Getting the brown diary back from Brienne was its own small problem. One I solved the plain way. Without deception, I called her directly the following Tuesday and told her I wanted Dorothy's diary back, the one she'd read from at my birthday dinner. It belonged to me now, and I intended to keep it somewhere safe. She hesitated on the phone, longer than a woman with nothing to hide usually hesitates over handing back a book. Of course, Francis, she said finally. I just thought everyone should get to know her a little better through it. I didn't mean anything by it. I understand, I said. I did not argue the point further. Arguing tips your hand before you're ready to play it. I'll have Gary pick it up Thursday. She had it ready Thursday, sitting on Todd's kitchen counter in a paper bag, like something she'd rather not be seen handling anymore. Gary brought it straight to me. I sat that evening with both diaries side by side on my kitchen table. Brown and green. 19 years and 11 months of Dorothy's own hand. I understood fully now exactly what I was holding. Not just evidence. Her whole voice. Everything she'd have said herself if she'd lived long enough to say it in person, sitting right there across from Brienne at whatever table this all finally came to a head. I brought both books to Priscilla's office that Friday. She read through the entries I'd marked. Slow. Thorough. The same careful attention she gives to everything that crosses her desk. This changes the shape of the open house, she said finally. I thought we were simply going to produce the trust and correct a misunderstanding about collateral. This is something larger. This is Dorothy, in her own words, answering the exact accusation Brienne made about her at that birthday table. The saint we pretend he was. Dorothy's own diary says the opposite. It says she saw the danger clearly, years in advance, and built around it with her eyes open. I want it read at the open house, I said. Not by me, by you. Dorothy's letter said if anyone ever tried to shame me with her private words, hand them the whole book. I intend to do exactly that. In front of the same people who watched Brienne do the opposite. Priscilla nodded slow. Then we need one more thing before that day comes. We need Brienne to say, on record, in front of witnesses, what she believes she's entitled to. Something specific enough that when the truth lands, there's no room for her to claim it was all some misunderstanding. Before I left her office that Friday, Priscilla mentioned one more thing, almost as an afterthought. The kind of detail a careful lawyer never quite lets stay an afterthought for long. There's an old shop ledger in your file too, Francis. From back when we first drew up the trust. Do you remember it? I did vaguely, the way a man remembers a document he signed once and never had cause to look at again. Gary and I drove to the shop that same afternoon and pulled it from the file cabinet in the back office. A bound record book, leather cover gone dry and cracked at the spine. The kind of ledger a small business kept before computers took over the job. This is the original valuation, Gary said, turning pages slow, careful with the brittle binding. From 2 years back. Before the trust was even finalised. Look here. He'd found the page. In my own handwriting, dated the same week, Dorothy sat across from Priscilla's desk and asked for the building protected. I'd recorded a full appraisal of everything the trust would come to hold. The Furnace Street building itself, appraised at $340,000. The equipment inside it, the original tempering unit, the cutting tables, the inventory of raw glass stock, appraised together at another 110,000. The 40 acres of timberland out past the old quarry road, valued conservatively at $90,000. A timber buyer had offered as much as 130 the year before, an offer I'd turned down. Dorothy loved walking that land too much to ever let it go to somebody who'd only see board feet where she saw a place to breathe. $540,000 all told, moved quietly into a trust 2 years before anyone but Dorothy and I, and later Priscilla, ever knew it existed. She protected more than the building, Gary said, closing the ledger careful. She protected the whole shape of what you two built together. Every dollar of it. I sat with that ledger a long while that evening, running my thumb along its cracked spine, the same way I'd run my thumb along 100,000 panes of glass over 47 years, feeling for exactly where the weight sat. $540,000 was not a number Brienne had ever known to reckon with. She'd been circling a building she believed was worth folding into a $98,000 loans collateral picture, never once understanding she was circling something worth more than 5 times that debt, sitting entirely beyond her reach, protected 2 years before she ever started circling. I brought the ledger to Priscilla the following Monday, added it to the folder alongside the diaries, the trust documents, and Dr. Mercer's evaluation. This shows the full scope, Priscilla said, reading through the appraisal figures with the same careful attention she gave everything. Not just that the property was protected, but exactly what was protected, and exactly how far ahead of this Dorothy was thinking. I'll have this ready Saturday as well. That's when I decided on the dinner. I called Todd myself the following week and told him I wanted to host a family dinner at my house, the Sunday before the open house, just the 4 of us. Him, Brienne, myself, and Karen driving in from Ohio for the weekend. Nothing formal. Pot roast the way Dorothy used to make it. The recipe written in her own hand, still taped inside my kitchen cabinet. Todd sounded surprised and a little relieved, the way a man sounds when he's hoping a bad stretch might finally be ending. That'd be good, Dad. I think that'd be real good. Brienne arrived that Sunday in a mood I can only describe as careful cheer, the kind people wear when they're hoping a room stays calm enough not to ask them anything hard. I served the pot roast at 6, same table Dorothy and I ate at for 44 years. About halfway through the meal, over coffee, I brought up the shop's anniversary open house, coming up in 11 days. I hear Walton Priddy's on the invite list, I said. Easy. The way a man mentions any ordinary fact. Nice fellow. The bank's financed a couple pieces of equipment for us over the years. Brienne's fork paused halfway to her mouth, just a half second, long enough that I saw it. Long enough I'd guessed that Karen saw it too. My daughter's eyes flicked toward her sister-in-law and stayed there a beat longer than casual. He's a good contact to have, Brienne said, recovering quick. Actually, Francis, since you brought up the bank, I've been meaning to ask you something. About the Furnace Street building. What about it? I said. Flat. Calm. The exact tone I use walking a customer through a quote I already know they won't like. I've been talking to Walton about restructuring some of the shop's financing. He mentioned that having the real estate itself as part of the collateral picture would open up better terms. I know there's some kind of trust arrangement holding the building, but I thought since it's really the family's asset either way, it might make sense to include it in the conversation. For everyone's benefit. There it was. Spoken out loud at my own dinner table, in front of my daughter and my son. Exactly the representation Priscilla needed on record. The trust owns that building outright, I said. No liens, no debt. Dorothy and I set it up that way 2 years ago, before she passed, specifically so it would never be exposed to anyone else's financial trouble, no matter how well-meaning the reason given. Brienne's careful cheer slipped just for a moment, the way a mask slips when the wearer forgets for half a second that anyone's still watching. I just think, practically speaking, since Todd runs the business that operates out of it. Todd runs the business, I said. He doesn't own the building. Neither do you. That was Dorothy's decision, made with her full mind and her full heart. I have no intention of undoing it now, for any reason. Todd looked up from his plate. For the first time in weeks, he looked directly at his wife instead of away from her. Brienne. What conversation with Walton Priddy? It's nothing, Todd. Just exploring options. $98,000 of options, I said. Quiet. And the whole table went still. 4 months behind last I heard. Is that still accurate? Brianne's face went the colour of the tablecloth. Karen set her fork down slow. Todd stared at his wife like a man seeing, for the first time, the actual shape of a debt he'd apparently never been told the full size of. How do you know that? Brianne said. Her voice had lost every bit of its careful cheer. I know a great many things about my own shop, I said. I've run it 47 years. A man doesn't stop knowing his own business just because he handed the daily keys to somebody else. I did not raise my voice through any of it. I never do. But I watched, across that table, the exact moment Brianne understood that whatever she thought she'd been quietly managing, out of sight, had never actually been out of my sight at all. I watched Todd's face do the harder work of understanding his own wife had been hiding the true size of a hole from him for the better part of a year and a half. I think, I said, setting my own fork down, finishing my coffee slow, the way I always do, that we should let the open house happen the way it's planned. And I think after that, this family's going to need a longer conversation than the one we're having tonight. Nobody argued. Nobody said another word about the trust, or Walton Priddy, or the $98,000 for the rest of that dinner. But something had shifted at that table, plain as a crack finally showing itself all the way across a pane of glass. Every one of us at it knew the open house, 11 days out, was no longer just a 40th anniversary party. Brianne called me 2 days later, different voice this time. No careful cheer left in it at all. Francis, I think we got off on the wrong foot Sunday, she said. I want you to know, everything I've done because I love this family and I want to protect it. I believe you love Todd, I said. I'm not sure yet what you believe protecting looks like. I've spoken to a colleague of mine, someone who handles elder care planning, and she thinks, given some of the memory concerns we've noticed. What memory concerns, I said. Flat. You've seemed distracted. Forgetful. Karen mentioned you seemed confused on a call a few weeks back. I had not been confused on any call with Karen. I had told my daughter plainly that Brianne was under pressure and looking for a story that made it someone else's problem. Brianne was now folding that same conversation back into evidence for the exact story I'd warned Karen she was building. My colleague thinks it might be worth having a doctor take a look, Brianne continued. Just a standard evaluation. For your own protection and the family's peace of mind going forward. There's a process, if it ever came to that, for a court to appoint someone to help manage affairs if a doctor felt it was warranted. There it was, laid out plain now. No more soft edges on it. Guardianship. The word she never said, dressed up in every polite word around it instead. A doctor she'd already be picking. A colleague who handled elder care planning, conveniently ready to point a finger at whatever direction Brianne needed pointed. I did not raise my voice. Brianne, I built this shop with $60 of tools and my own 2 hands, 47 years ago. I have run every invoice, every payroll, every contract that business has ever signed without a single lapse anyone could point to, including this year. I scored a freehand cut on tempered glass 3 weeks ago that a grown man half my age is still telling people about. If you want to send a doctor to evaluate me, send one. I'll pass whatever test he brings, the same way I've passed every test this business has ever handed me for 47 years. She went quiet a moment. I just think it's worth exploring, that's all. For everyone's sake. I think I said, you should focus less on my memory and more on the $98,000 sitting 4 months behind at the bank. That's the piece of this family's business that actually needs some evaluating. I ended the call there, polite, final. The way I end every call I don't intend to let run longer than it needs to, but I sat in my kitchen a long while after, turning the shape of it over. A guardianship petition, if she actually filed one, would need a doctor's finding, a court date, a judge, and time. None of which Brianne had in abundance, with the bank meeting 3 weeks out, and the open house sooner than that. I called Priscilla that same evening. She's threatening a competency evaluation, I told her, talking about guardianship dressed up soft, through some colleague who handles elder care. That's a serious escalation, Priscilla said. If she's serious and not just posturing to scare you into folding the trust voluntarily, she'd need to file a petition, get a physician's affidavit, and get it in front of a judge. That takes weeks at minimum, sometimes months. Courts do not move quickly on these matters, especially against a man with your documented history of running an active business without incident. Could she still try it before the open house? She could try to file something. Trying and succeeding are different animals. Francis, I want you to understand something plainly. If she files a guardianship petition against you with no legitimate medical basis, purely to gain leverage over an asset she's not entitled to, that is not just an aggressive family dispute anymore. That becomes its own exposure for her, and for whatever attorney agrees to represent that filing without real medical evidence behind it. Good, I said. Let her file it then. I'll pass whatever doctor she sends. And I'll have documentation of 47 years running a business without a single lapse to put right next to whatever thin evaluation she manages to produce. I did something else that week. Quiet, the way I do most things that matter. I called my own physician, Dr. Adele Mercer, who treated me 11 years, asked her plainly to run a full cognitive evaluation, the same kind a court would request, so that if anyone ever tried to claim otherwise, I'd have my own current, clean results sitting on file before anyone else's paid evaluation ever reached a judge's desk. Dr. Mercer ran the full battery 2 days later. Memory, reasoning, orientation, the whole standard set. I scored, in her own words, as sharp as anyone I've tested this year, regardless of age. She signed the report herself and had 2 copies notarized. One for my file, one for Priscilla's. You anticipated this, Priscilla said, when I brought the report by her office. I've anticipated a great many things in my life, I said. It's how a shop survives 47 years without ever going under. You don't wait for the storm to see if your roof holds. You check the roof before the storm ever shows up on the radar. Karen called again that week. Less worried this time. More angry. The good kind of angry. The kind that comes from a daughter finally understanding who's actually been threatening her father. Dad, Brianne called me again. She's saying you might need, I don't know, some kind of oversight. Guardianship stuff. Dad, this is insane. I told her flat out, my father has run a business longer than she's been alive, and he's sharper than most people I know, half his age. Thank you for saying that to her, Karen. I mean it, Dad. What is she after? This isn't about you forgetting things. This is about something else. It's about $98,000, I said, and a bank meeting 3 weeks out, and a piece of land she thinks she can reach that she never actually could. I'll explain the whole shape of it soon. I promise you that. Is Todd okay in all this? That question sat harder than the others. I don't know yet, I told her, honest. I think your brother's been looking away from a hard truth for a long while. I think he's about to have to look straight at it, whether he's ready or not. Karen flew in from Ohio early, 4 days before the open house, instead of waiting for the Saturday itself. She came straight to my house from the airport, suitcase still in her hand, and asked to see everything. The diaries, the letter, the trust documents, the ledger. She sat at my kitchen table a full afternoon, reading through it all slow, the way her mother used to read through a stack of piano sheet music before deciding which pieces a student was ready for. Dad, she said, when she reached Dorothy's letter, the part where her mother wrote about watching Brianne total up a room with her eyes. Mum saw this coming years before any of us did. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this was in motion? Because it wasn't finished being in motion, I said. A foundation isn't a house yet. You don't invite people to admire a foundation. You wait until there's something standing on it worth showing. Karen turned to the ledger next, ran her finger down the appraisal figures, the way I had 3 days earlier. $340,000 for the building, $110,000 for the equipment, $90,000 for the timberland, more once you counted the offer I'd turned down. $540,000, she said. Quiet. Brianne thought she was circling something she could fold into a $98,000 loan. She never had any idea what she was actually circling. No, I said. She didn't. Dad, I want to be there Saturday. Not just as a guest. I want to stand next to you when this happens. I was hoping you would, I told her, and I meant it. A man doesn't do a thing like this alone if he's got family willing to stand there with him. Karen had earned her place in that room a dozen times over. Every phone call, every worried question she'd asked on my behalf instead of Brianne's. She stayed at my house those last few nights before the open house. One evening, going through an old box of family photographs, looking for pictures for the anniversary table, she found something neither of us expected. A photograph of Dorothy and me, taken the year we broke ground on the Furnace Street building itself, back when it was still a bare lot with a hand-lettered sign. On the back, in Dorothy's handwriting, a note I'd never once seen in 40-some years of keeping that photograph in a shoebox. $60 of tools and $110 a month in rent, it read. Francis says we're crazy. I told him crazy is just what careful looks like before anybody else understands it yet. Karen read it out loud at my kitchen table. Neither of us said anything for a long moment after. Some things your late wife leaves behind aren't legal documents or diary entries at all. Sometimes they're 4 lines on the back of a photograph, waiting decades for the right evening to be found. She really did see everything, didn't she? Karen said finally. She saw the shape of people before most folks ever bothered looking, I said. It was the sharpest thing about her and the gentlest. She could tell you exactly what somebody was scared of. She'd still find a way to be kind about it, right up until kindness stopped being enough to keep a family safe. Todd himself came by the shop alone, the Thursday before the open house, without Brianne, without calling ahead first, which he hadn't done in longer than I could easily recall. He found me in the back office, going over the final walkthrough checklist for Saturday's event. 40 tables rented, 200 invitations sent, the whole shop scrubbed floor to rafters for the first time since we poured the new concrete pad 5 years back. Dad, he said, and stood there a moment, the way a man stands when he's got something heavy to set down and isn't sure yet how to start setting it. I pulled the loan file myself last night. Actual numbers. Not what Brianne told me, what the bank's records actually say. And 98,000 4 months behind, and a 5th payment due in 9 days that we don't have sitting anywhere I can find. I didn't know it was this bad, Dad. I swear to you I didn't know. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. Dorothy's letter had said the same thing. In her own hand, 2 years before any of this. Our son was weak in this. Not wicked. Talked into things. Kept in the dark by a wife who managed the books close enough to her own chest that even her own husband couldn't see the whole shape of the whole. She's been telling me the commercial contracts were coming, Todd said. Every month. Coming next month. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Believing the alternative meant admitting I'd let someone else run half my own business, without ever really checking the math myself. That's the hardest lesson any man in business ever learns, I said. Trusting somebody isn't the same as checking the work. I trusted your mother with the books 34 years, Todd, and I still walked that floor and checked every invoice myself. Every single week. Trust and verification were never supposed to replace each other. Todd sat down across from me, the same chair he'd sat in 100 times as a boy, waiting for me to finish a phone call before we drove home together. She talked about a doctor, about you needing, oversight. Dad, I never agreed to any of that. I want you to know that. I know you didn't, I said. I've watched you not agree to a great many things this whole while by staying quiet instead of standing beside me. That's its own kind of cost, Todd. Silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice, same as speaking is. He didn't argue that. He sat with it, the way a man sits with a true thing he'd rather not have heard. After a while he said, quiet. What happened Saturday, Dad? Saturday. The truth gets said out loud, in front of the people it concerns, by people who aren't afraid to say it. I told him. After that, this family finds out what it's actually built on. Todd nodded slow. For the first time in weeks, he looked like a man bracing for something instead of hiding from it. That, I decided, watching him walk back out to his truck, was the first real crack of daylight I'd seen in this whole business. Not proof he'd changed, just proof he'd finally started looking straight at the wall instead of past it. I spent the 2 days before the open house the way I spend the 2 days before any job I intend to get right the first time. I checked every detail twice. I confirmed with Priscilla that she'd have both diaries, the trust documents, and Dr. Mercer's notarized evaluation with her Saturday morning, in a folder she wouldn't open until the moment called for it. I confirmed Gary would have the tin recipe box, still locked, still exactly where it had sat 2 years, brought up from my workshop desk himself, in his own truck, the same truck that had carried Dorothy's diaries safely away from a donation bin months earlier. I confirmed the guest list included Walton Priddy, arriving at 11, same as the invitation Brianne herself had helped address. Friday night, the night before, I sat one more time in Dorothy's chair by the sunroom window, both her diaries on my lap, her letter folded back into its envelope in the tin box waiting in Gary's truck. I told her, out loud in the empty house, exactly what I intended to do the next day. I'm going to let them read your words, I said. All of them. The way you asked me to. And I'm going to stand there quiet while somebody else says it. The way I've stood quiet through everything else in this whole life. Because that's always been the loudest thing I know how to do. The house didn't answer me back. It never has. But I slept that night the way I always sleep the night before. A job I know I've prepared for, as well as any man can prepare. Except the call came at 7 the next morning, before I'd even finished my coffee. Priscilla's voice, sharper than I'd ever heard it. Francis, Brienne filed something yesterday afternoon. A petition. Emergency guardianship. Requesting the court appoint a temporary conservator over your financial affairs, pending a full competency hearing. I set my coffee cup down slow. On what grounds? An affidavit from a physician named Dr. Sheldon Carew, out of Dunmore Junction. He states he examined you 3 weeks ago and found signs of, his words, significant cognitive decline, consistent with early dementia. I've never met a Dr. Sheldon Carew in my life, I said. I didn't think you had. The affidavit claims the examination occurred at your home on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks back. I need you to tell me plainly, Francis. Was any doctor in your house that day, for any reason at all? I thought back, careful, the way I think through every piece of arithmetic before I speak on it. 3 weeks back put us in the same week Brienne first called me about the durable power of attorney. No, I said. Nobody came to my house that week except Gary. Twice for coffee. No doctor. I'd remember a doctor in my own kitchen, Priscilla. That's not the kind of thing a man forgets. Then we have a forged or fraudulent affidavit. Or at minimum a physician willing to sign something he never actually performed, Priscilla said. Either way, that's not just an aggressive filing anymore, Francis. That's potentially a crime on top of the civil exposure. I've already filed an emergency response with Dr. Mercer's notarized evaluation attached, along with a formal request that the court investigate the Carew affidavit before any hearing proceeds. Given the timing, 3 days before your anniversary open house, and given the total absence of any actual examination, I expect the judge to view this extremely skeptically. But Francis, I need you to understand. A petition like this, even a false one, can create real complications if it isn't handled exactly right. It can freeze accounts. It can raise questions with vendors, with the bank, with anyone doing business with the shop, the moment word gets out that a competency question is in front of a judge. My hands were steady on the phone, the way my hands have stayed steady through worse mornings than this one. Has word gotten out? Not yet that I'm aware of. These filings aren't public until they're docketed for hearing. I've asked the clerk's office, as a courtesy, to hold the docketing a few extra days while we sort out the Carew affidavit's authenticity. That buys us until after Saturday, if the clerk cooperates, which I believe she will, given what we've already submitted. Good, I said. Then Saturday happens exactly the way we planned it. Francis, this is a serious escalation. She's not simply threatening anymore. She's acted. She's used a physician's name to do it, whether that physician cooperated willingly or whether his identity was used without his knowledge. I need to know you understand the weight of that before you walk into a room full of 160 people Saturday and settle this the way you've described. I understand it, I said. I've understood the weight of harder things than this. 47 years of running a shop teaches a man the weight of nearly everything eventually. This doesn't change what happens Saturday, Priscilla. If anything, it tells me exactly how much is riding on it for her, and exactly how little time she thinks she has left to make her version stick before mine does. Priscilla was quiet a moment on the line. I'll have a certified copy of the petition itself in the folder Saturday, alongside everything else. If she's going to stand in that room and claim this was all some family misunderstanding, I intend for the record to show precisely what she actually filed, 3 days beforehand, using a doctor's name I cannot yet confirm ever agreed to any of it. I called Dr. Mercer myself that same morning. Asked her directly whether she knew a Dr. Sheldon Carew. She did, slightly. A semi-retired general practitioner 2 towns over, who'd stopped taking new patients the year before. She promised to make a call of her own, quiet, physician to physician, and see what she could learn before Saturday. She called back that evening. Francis, Dr. Carew tells me he's never examined you, never met you, and never signed any affidavit regarding your cognitive state. He says someone contacted his office claiming to need a routine records release form signed. He believes now that form may have been altered or misrepresented after the fact. He's contacting his own attorney tonight, and he's furious, Francis. A stolen signature on a document like this is the kind of thing that ends a medical license if it's proven. And he intends to make certain it's proven. I sat with that a long moment. The true shape of what Brianne had done settling into me slow. The way a bad diagnosis settles into a man, not all at once, but in layers. She had not simply exaggerated a worry or misread an ordinary forgetful moment the way families sometimes do, out of love gone anxious. She had taken, or caused to be taken, a real physician's actual signature, attached it to a lie about an examination that never happened, filed it with a court 3 days before I intended to answer everything else she'd done in full public view. "Does this change anything?" I asked Priscilla when I called her back that night. "It changes the tone," she said. "It doesn't change the plan. If anything, Francis, I'd suggest we let this new piece stay quiet until Saturday too. Let her stand in that room, believing her petition is still working its way through channels she controls. There's a particular kind of justice in letting someone discover, in front of witnesses, that the one thing they thought was still their ace card had already been exposed as a fraud before they ever played it." "Agreed," I said. I did not sleep easily that Friday night. I'll admit that much plainly. A stolen doctor's signature is a different weight than an aggressive suggestion over the phone. But I sat in Dorothy's chair a long while, both her diaries on my lap, and I reminded myself of the one thing I have always known, truer than almost anything else. A crack doesn't finish you the moment it appears. It only finishes you if you let it run unwatched. I had watched this one from the very first hairline, the night of that birthday dinner. I did not intend to stop watching it now, 3 days from the moment it either sealed shut for good or split the whole pane wide open. I woke Saturday morning to a clear October sky. 47 years of work and now a forged doctor's affidavit besides, waiting to be either honoured or undone in front of the whole town. The shop looked better that morning than it had any morning I could remember. Gary had strung white lights along the rafters the night before. The medical building's storefront glass job sat finished in the front window, a showpiece now, $11,200 of work catching the morning sun. 40 folding tables, rented from the same company that did my birthday dinner. Nobody in that room was thinking about the irony of it, yet except me. 200 invitations sent. 160 people came through those doors by noon. Half the county, near enough. Customers going back 4 decades. The mayor of Millbrook Falls, who'd had his own storefront glass done by my hands back in 1991. Reverend Aldous from the church in Dunmore Junction, whose sanctuary windows I'd repaired more times than either of us could count. Old Sam Pruitt, 91 years old, who'd sold me my very first cutting table for $80 back when I was 25 and didn't have the credit to buy new. Karen arrived early to help set up, wearing her mother's old brooch, the one Dorothy wore to every important occasion for 30 years. A small thing, nothing valuable in dollars, maybe $40 originally, but worth more to this family than anything Brianne had ever tried to reach for. She caught my eye across the room once, steady, the way she'd been steady all week since she'd flown in early. I nodded back once, the two of us understanding exactly what the day was going to hold before it held it. Priscilla's assistant had quietly confirmed, the day before, that Walton Priddy would in fact attend. Along with 2 other bank officers he was bringing to see the shop's 40th anniversary displays, a detail that only sharpened the stakes of what was about to happen in front of them. Todd worked the room in a way I hadn't seen him work anything in a year and a half. Present, steady, shaking hands, thanking people for coming. The way a man does when he's decided to stop hiding from something and start standing in front of it instead. Brianne worked the room too, bright and careful, the same careful cheer she'd worn at that Sunday dinner. Greeting Walton Priddy the moment he walked through the door at 11 sharp, steering him toward the coffee and the pastry table, with the particular warmth of a woman who needed a specific conversation to go a specific way before the day was through. I watched all of it from the back of the shop, near the tempering unit, shaking hands of my own, thanking people for 47 years of trusting Corrigan Glass and Glazing with their storefronts and their sanctuaries and their family homes. Priscilla arrived at 11:30, sharp navy suit, a leather folder under one arm that she did not open, did not mention. She simply carried it the way she carries every piece of evidence she's ever brought into a room. Patient, unhurried, exactly on time. Gary had the tin recipe box in his truck, parked out back, close enough to reach inside of 2 minutes if the moment called for it. I let the party breathe a while. An hour, maybe more. I ate a slice of the anniversary cake, correctly spelled this time, Corrigan glass and glazing, 40 years, in blue icing across white. I answered questions about the old cutting table from Sam Pruitt's grandson, who wanted to know if I still had it. I did. Still in the back, still sharp, still the first thing I ever bought with money I'd earned myself instead of borrowed. Around noon, Walton Priddy found his way toward me, coffee in hand, Brianne a step behind him, steering, the way she'd steered him all morning. "Francis," Walton said, shaking my hand firm, 40 years. That's something, in this business climate. Not many independent shops make it this far anymore. 47, actually, I said. We're marking the 40th anniversary of the building itself. The business is older, even more impressive. Walton glanced toward Brianne, an easy professional glance. The kind two people share when they've already had more than one conversation about something the room doesn't know about yet. Brianne mentioned you all might be looking at restructuring some of the shop's financing. I understand there's a piece of real estate that could strengthen the collateral picture significantly, if the family decided to include it. There it was, spoken out loud now, in front of witnesses at the exact event Brianne had helped plan herself, never once imagining the ground under her own plan had already shifted, 2 years before she'd started walking on it. "Walton," I said, calm, the same tone I've used my whole life to walk a nervous customer through a quote they weren't expecting. "I think this is a good moment for you to hear something directly, rather than second-hand. Would you mind stepping over by the front tables? I've got someone here who can explain the actual structure of that property a good deal better than I can." Walton, a careful man himself, the kind who spent a career learning to read a room before a deal ever gets signed, glanced at Brianne's face. Whatever he saw there, some flicker of unease she couldn't quite smooth over fast enough, seemed to decide something for him. "Of course," he said. I raised my voice just slightly, just enough to carry across the room without shouting. The loudest I'd spoken in the whole 2 months since that birthday dinner. "Folks, if I could have everyone's attention, just a moment. I know this is meant to be a celebration, and it still is. But there's a piece of family business I'd like to settle today, in front of the people who've supported this shop for 47 years, rather than let it drag on quietly behind closed doors." The room settled, the particular hush of 160 people sensing all at once that something real was about to happen. Todd moved toward me, standing close, the way a son stands when he's finally decided which side of a room he belongs on. Karen, who'd flown back in for the occasion, stood on my other side. Brianne stayed where she was, near Walton, her careful cheer gone entirely now, replaced by something tighter, more brittle. A woman watching a door close that she hadn't realised was even swinging. "Priscilla," I said, "would you mind stepping up?" Priscilla Wenrick crossed the room, unhurried, the leather folder still under her arm. She stood beside me at the front of my own shop, 47 years of work behind her, 160 witnesses in front of her. 2 months ago, Priscilla said, her voice carrying clean and even across the room. At a family dinner, Dorothy Corrigan's private diary was read aloud, in part in front of this family, to suggest that Francis Corrigan was not the man everyone believed him to be. I'd like to correct that record today, using Dorothy's own words, because Dorothy herself asked, in writing, that if anyone ever tried to use her private words to shame her husband, the whole book should be handed over, not just the page somebody found convenient. She opened the leather folder, brown leather diary first, corners soft, the same book Brianne had read from at that birthday table. "This is the entry Brianne read that night," Priscilla said, and read it herself. Plain, without embellishment. The old fight over money, 31 years back, forgiven the next morning over eggs. Now here is the page, immediately following it. The page Brianne never found. The room went still in a different way now. 160 people leaning in, without quite meaning to. "Francis and I fought hard that spring," Priscilla read, in Dorothy's own words. "Over $60 we didn't have, and a shop payment I was terrified we'd miss. I said things I regretted. So did he. But here is what none of you at whatever table hears this were ever told. The next morning Francis sold his own father's pocket watch, the only thing of his father's he had left without telling me, and covered that payment himself, in silence. The way he has covered nearly every hard thing in this marriage. In silence. expecting no credit and receiving none, until I found the pawn ticket in his coat 3 years later and finally understood what he'd actually done that week. He built every single thing we have with those same hands, and he never once, not once in 34 years, asked me to admire him for it. If anyone ever thinks reading the argument without reading this page tells the truth about my husband, they have told only half a story, and half a story is its own kind of lie. Somewhere in the room somebody made a small sound, a gasp or something close to it. I did not look to see who. I kept my eyes on Brienne, who stood very still now, the colour gone fully from her face. There is a second diary, Priscilla continued, and lifted the green one, water-stained corner, 19 years of entries, written earlier and recovered only recently. In it, Dorothy Corrigan wrote, 4 years before her death, an observation about a member of this family that I believe is relevant to why we're gathered here today. She read the entry about totalling up a room, about fear reaching for whatever's closest, about being careful, not cruel. Quietly, so nobody would ever feel accused before the moment it actually mattered. Dorothy Corrigan saw this coming, Priscilla said, closing the diary gently, years before any of us did. So, acting on her wishes, 2 years ago, Francis and Dorothy Corrigan placed the Furnace Street building, the equipment inside it, and 40 acres of adjoining timberland into the Dorothy Corrigan Family Trust. Francis is sole trustee. Gary Oglethorpe is named successor trustee. The trust owns this property outright, with no liens, no encumbrances, and no debt of any kind recorded against it, and has for 2 full years. She turned directly to Walton Priddy, who stood very still now himself, coffee cup forgotten in his hand. Mr. Priddy, I understand a meeting has been scheduled for 3 weeks from now to discuss including this real property as collateral in a refinancing of a $98,000 equipment note, currently 4 months delinquent. I want to state clearly in front of this gathering that this property was never available to be pledged as collateral for any loan by anyone other than the trustee. Francis Corrigan has never authorised, and will never authorise, any such arrangement. Walton set his coffee cup down slow on the nearest table. I was told the family owned it jointly, he said, and his voice had gone careful now too, the voice of a man realising he'd nearly walked into something that would have cost him professionally. I was told it was a formality, given who runs the business day to day. It was never a formality, Priscilla said, and I have the recorded deed filed with the county 2 years ago, right here, should you need it for your own file. She produced a single page from the folder and handed it to Walton. He read it standing there in front of 160 people, his face changing as he did. I stepped forward then, for the first time, and spoke myself, quiet, the way I always speak. Walton, I want to be clear about something, so there's no confusion left in this room. I have run this shop 47 years without a single missed payment, a single dishonest invoice, or a single lapse anyone can point to, including this year. 2 weeks ago, I had my own physician run a full evaluation, unprompted, notarized, current. I'll have Priscilla show you that too, if you'd like, though I suspect you won't need it, given what you've just read. Priscilla produced Dr. Mercer's notarized report and handed it across as well. Walton looked at it, then looked up, first at me, then slower, at Brienne. I think, Walton said, careful, professional. The words of a man already composing in his head whatever he'd need to say to his own bank Monday morning, that the meeting we had scheduled will need to be cancelled. And I think, given what's been represented to the bank in the preliminary paperwork already submitted, we may need to have a further conversation about the accuracy of that application. Separately, not here. Brienne's mouth opened, then closed. Whatever careful cheer she'd carried through this whole ordeal had nowhere left to live. I never said the property was collateral, she said. Too fast, too thin. I only asked about the possibility. You listed it as prospective collateral on the preliminary loan modification request, Walton said. Quiet now himself. Not unkind, just factual. A man laying out what the paperwork actually said. I have the document in my own file, Brienne. That's not a possibility. That's a representation. The room had gone entirely silent now. 160 people watching a woman's careful architecture come apart in real time. In the same shop she'd once told a birthday table her father-in-law couldn't be trusted to run correctly in his own mind. I let that silence sit a moment. The way I let every hard fact sit in a room without decorating it. Then I turned, Not to Brienne, but to Todd, standing beside me. Todd, I said, I want you to hear this next part directly from me, not from a lawyer, not from a bank officer. This shop, and the land it sits on, belonged to your mother and me. Now it belongs to a trust set up to protect it. Exactly the way she asked, because she loved you enough to plan for a day she hoped would never come. None of this was ever about taking anything from you. It was about making sure nothing could be taken from you either, by somebody who never built a single piece of it. Todd's eyes were wet, and he did not look away this time. Not from me, not from anyone in that room. I didn't know, Dad, about any of it. The loan, the trust, none of it. I should have checked the books myself instead of trusting somebody else's word for it. I know, I said. You will next time. That's the whole lesson. If there's one lesson worth taking from any of this. I turned last to Gary, who had slipped in from the back sometime during Priscilla's reading, the tin recipe box in both hands. I nodded once. He stepped forward and set it on the table beside the diaries. Scuffed metal, faded painted roses, the key already in my own pocket where it had sat for 2 years. One more thing, I said, and opened the box myself in front of everyone. The notarized trust documents inside, the deed, the letter Dorothy had written and Priscilla had held sealed until circumstances made it necessary. My wife kept a diary every night of her life. She asked in her own hand that if anyone ever tried to use her private words against me, I hand over the whole book, not just the page they found useful. I've done that today. I think she'd have wanted it done exactly this way. In public. Quiet. No shouting. Just the truth. Laid out where everyone could see it plainly. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. But I watched, across that room, Sam Pruitt nod slow, 91 years old. The man who'd sold me my first cutting table for $80. I watched the mayor of Millbrook Falls put a hand briefly on Todd's shoulder. I watched 160 people understand, all at once, exactly what kind of man had built the shop they'd been celebrating all afternoon. I was not finished, though. There was one more piece of paper in that folder, and Priscilla knew it. She waited, patient, for my nod before she brought it out. There is one final matter, Priscilla said, and the room, which had begun its first small murmurs of relief, went quiet again. Yesterday morning, this family, and this court, received an emergency petition seeking guardianship over Francis Corrigan's financial affairs, on the grounds of alleged cognitive decline. That petition was supported by a signed affidavit, attributed to a Dr. Sheldon Carew, claiming a personal examination of Mr. Corrigan 3 weeks ago. She held the document up. Not far, just enough that the nearest rows could see the letterhead. I spoke with Dr. Carew's office myself, as did Francis's own physician. Dr. Carew has confirmed, in a sworn statement of his own filed this morning, that no such examination ever took place. He has never met Francis Corrigan. His signature, appearing on this affidavit, was obtained through what he describes as a misrepresented records request. He has retained his own counsel to pursue the matter. Somewhere near the coffee table, a woman I didn't know gasped, he plain and sharp. The sound a room makes when it understands. All at once, exactly how far someone was willing to go. The petition itself, Priscilla continued, was filed by Brienne Corrigan. Every head in that room turned, slow, toward Brienne, standing near Walton Priddy. Whatever colour had been left in her face after the collateral revelation now entirely gone, really. I never told anyone to forge anything, Brienne said, her voice cracking now. No careful cheer left anywhere in it. I found a doctor through an agency. I didn't ask how he got his information. I needed help. I needed someone to say something was wrong so we'd have time to fix the loan before. She stopped herself too late. The sentence already half out in front of 160 witnesses. Before what? Everyone in that room now understood without her needing to finish it. Before the bank found out. Before Todd found out. Before anyone had the chance to stop her from pledging land she never owned against a debt she'd hidden for a year and a half. That's an admission, Walton said. Quiet, to no one in particular, though everyone heard it anyway. I did not raise my voice through any of it. I simply looked at Brienne, across that room full of the people who trusted my hands with their storefronts and their sanctuaries for 47 years, and I said the only thing I had left to say to her directly. I don't get loud, I told her. I get accurate. That's all I've ever been. Accurate is a hard thing to argue with, once it's laid out where everyone can see it. Brienne left within the hour, alone. Nobody stopping her, nobody needing to. Todd stayed behind with me and Karen and Gary. The party slowly resumed its ordinary shape around the edges of what had just happened. Cake and coffee and old customers telling old stories. The four of us stood near the back, near the tempering unit that had started this whole mess of debt 18 months back, and said very little at all. Because sometimes the truest thing a family can do, right after something like that, is simply stand together in the same room and let the quiet do its work. The weeks after moved the way weeks move once the worst of a storm has already passed, and all that's left is counting what got knocked down. Priscilla's emergency response, filed the same morning Brianne's petition landed, carried the day easily once the judge saw Dr. Carew's own sworn statement denying any examination ever took place. The guardianship petition was dismissed within 9 days. The judge's written order noted, in language Priscilla read to me over the phone, with more satisfaction than I'd ever heard in her voice, that the filing appears to have been made in bad faith, using a fraudulently obtained physician's signature, for the apparent purpose of gaining financial leverage rather than protecting the respondent's welfare. Dr. Carew's attorney referred the matter to the State Medical Board and, separately, to the county prosecutor, for review of how his client's signature came to appear on a document he never signed. I don't know, even now, exactly how that review concluded behind closed doors, whether charges were filed or a quiet settlement reached instead. Priscilla told me, and I believed her, that it was no longer any business of mine to chase. I'd built the wall Dorothy asked me to build. I'd let the truth stand up in the room where it needed to stand. The rest belonged to people whose job it was to sort out, and I have never once in my life tried to do a job that wasn't mine to do. Walton Priddy's Bank, separately, opened its own internal review of the original loan application, the one listing prospective collateral that had never legally existed. Todd, to his credit, cooperated fully, provided every document the bank requested, worked with Walton directly to restructure the $98,000 note against the equipment alone, at a smaller value than the original loan, the kind of correction that costs a business real money but costs it honestly, which is the only kind of costing I've ever had patience for. The shop took a real hit that quarter, close to $11,000 in refinancing fees and a higher rate than the original note carried. Todd paid it without complaint, without asking me to cover a dollar of it myself. That told me more about the man my son was becoming than almost anything he'd said to me directly in the whole ordeal. Brianne and Todd separated 4 months after the open house. I want to be plain about something here, the same way I've tried to be plain about everything else in this account. I did not push for that separation. I never once told my son what to do about his own marriage. That was never mine to decide, any more than the bank's internal review was mine to chase. But a marriage built partly on hidden debt and a forged doctor's affidavit does not survive easily once both of those things stand exposed in front of 160 witnesses. I think, in his own time, in his own way, Todd came to understand that the marriage had been carrying its own hidden crack a good deal longer than the $98,000 had. Brianne moved to Erie, near her own family, and started over there. Working, from what Karen tells me, at an accounting firm, keeping other people's books instead of her own family's. I hold no particular anger towards her. Not anymore. Dorothy wrote it best, years before any of us knew how far it would go. Scared people reach for whatever's closest and try to make it smaller so their own fear feels more manageable. I think Brianne was frightened of not having enough, in a way that curdled into something that hurt people who never deserved it. I hope wherever she's landed, she's found a way to stop being frightened in that particular direction. That's the most generosity I have left to offer her, and I offer it honestly. Todd came to see me most Sundays after that, the way he hadn't in longer than either of us wanted to admit. Not all at once. Trust doesn't rebuild itself the way a business restructures a loan, on a clean schedule with a clear end date. It rebuilds slow, the way concrete cures, and you don't trust it fully until it's had the time it actually needs. 6 months after the open house, Todd asked me to walk the shop floor with him one Saturday morning, just the two of us, the way Gary and I had walked it every morning for 31 years. He'd pulled every invoice himself that quarter, checked every number against the bank statements personally, hired an outside bookkeeper on Priscilla's recommendation, someone with no personal stake in any number she recorded. I want to run it the way you always did, Todd told me that morning, standing by the same tempering unit that had cost him so much. Trust, but check the work anyway. I don't ever want to be a man standing at his own dinner table again, not knowing the real size of a hole in his own business. That's the whole trade, Todd, I told him. Not the glass, the checking. Any man can learn to cut a straight line. Not every man learns to check his own work before somebody else has to check it for him. We stood there a long while that morning, father and son. The shop quiet around us, the way it's quiet before the first customer walks in. I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled since the night of that birthday dinner. Not a full mending. Some things don't mend all the way, and I've never believed in pretending otherwise. But a real beginning. Honestly earned. The only kind of beginning I've ever put much stock in. Todd did one more thing that year that told me more than any apology could have. He took the $12,000 in fees the shop saved by refinancing the tempering unit at a fair rate instead of the inflated one Brianne had nearly locked us into. He set it aside, untouched in its own account, and asked me what I thought it should go toward. Your grandmother's church windows need repointing, I told him. $600 would cover the mortar and my own labour. The rest I'd put towards something your mother would have wanted more than either of us fixing old glass. We ended up funding 2 full scholarships that year, $2,500 apiece, for graduating seniors at the county's trade school. One in glazing, one in general fabrication. Named quietly, at Todd's own insistence. Not after me, but after Dorothy. The Dorothy Corrigan Craft Scholarship. Awarded each spring to a young person willing to learn a trade with their own 2 hands, the same way I'd learned mine at 25. With $60 of tools and more stubbornness than sense. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl named Patrice Lundgren. Quiet. Sharp-eyed. The kind of young woman who reminded me more than I expected of Dorothy herself at that age, before I ever met her. She came by the shop to thank us in person. I gave her the same freehand cut demonstration I'd given a dozen strangers that year, and told her the same thing I've told everyone since. You don't raise your voice at a crack in the glass, I told her. You find where it started, and you stop it there. That's true of glass. It's true of a family. It's true of a life, if you're patient enough to let it teach you slow instead of demanding it teach you fast. She wrote me a thank you letter afterward. Careful cursive. I keep it now in the same tin box where Dorothy's diaries sit, because it felt somehow like it belonged with the rest of what that box has come to hold. Not just what was protected, what got built forward from the protecting. I still keep Dorothy's chair by the sunroom window, exactly where she left it. Both diaries sit in the tin recipe box now, alongside the trust documents and her letter, back in my workshop desk, locked with the second key that still isn't on the shop ring. I read a page or two some evenings, not looking for anything in particular anymore, just keeping company with her voice, the way I've kept company with it for 2 years now, and will keep company with it, I expect, for whatever years I've got left. The medical building job finished on schedule, the $11,200 paid in full, the storefront glass catching the morning light, the same clean way every pane I've ever cut has caught it. I still walk the shop floor with Gary every morning at 6:30. I still charge a fair price for a fair job. I still tell any young man who tries to overpay me that a man who charges more than the job is worth has already started lying to himself. Last month, I fixed another cracked storefront pane, this one for a new bakery 2 doors down from where the old diner used to sit. Scored it freehand, same as always. No straight edge, the way I've done it 47 years running. The young woman who owns the bakery watched the whole thing, same disbelief on her face that I've seen on a dozen faces since. 72 years old and you still do it yourself, she said, echoing words I've heard more than once this year. I don't raise my voice at a crack in the glass, I told her. The way I've told it before, the way I'll likely tell it again. I find where it started. I stop it there. That's not just a line about glass, and it never was. It's the truest thing I know about a family, a business, or a life spent building both with your own 2 hands. I never threw a punch in this whole ordeal. Never raised my voice. Not once. Not at that birthday table. Not at that dinner where the truth first slipped out. Not even in the moment I watched a woman's whole careful architecture come apart in front of 160 witnesses. The only weapons I ever needed were patience, an honest ledger, and the plain truth, laid out where anyone willing to look could see it for themselves. Dorothy asked me, in her own hand, 2 years before any of this started, to protect what we built without ever needing to explain myself to anyone who wasn't ready to understand it. I think I did exactly that. I think wherever she is, she'd tell me I did it the right way, the quiet way, her way, the only way either of us ever knew how to do anything that mattered. The crack ran its whole course, same as every crack eventually does. And the glass somehow, against every worry I carried through those 2 long months, held.